Hello and welcome to the 17th episode of Beyond the Present podcast. My name is Daniel Morgan. I'm here joined by Poujix, live from Canada. Hey there, my man. How's it going?
Hey there, guys. How are you?
I am wonderful, and I hope that you are the same. And of course, guys, Kenny is back. That's right. He's back for yet another episode, and he's right here with us. So, Kenny, my man, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be back on the show.
Fantastic. Glad to have you on board with us. So today we are talking about the issue of going back to school after a long break. So going back to school does not mean going back to school after a summer break. Let's be honest. Let's just clear that out right now. We're talking about going back to school after having left for a while, perhaps working, starting your own business, and then deciding you want to get more education. So to go any further, let's start off with Kenny and his story, what happened to him basically. So Kenny, why don't you tell us about yourself and what exactly happened to you that you decided to go back to school?
That's a very good question. When I was doing my undergrad, I was really excited about a lot of courses that I took during my undergrad. And I was generally enthusiastic about what material the professors were teaching and all that. So I was always connected even after I left school after my undergrad and went to the work, went to the industry. But I always kept in touch with what's going on, through friends who were still in school or through my juniors. And I always had this inkling in me for masters. At that time, I did not know what masters would garner my attention, but that was something that was always in the back of my head.
Interesting. Before we go any further, I want to know about your major, by the way, in bachelor's, and also what industry you got in after you graduated.
So I did a bachelor's in computer science, software engineering, and I took a fair bit of math courses in addition to computer science. So right after I graduated, I went in the IT. I worked for a bank in Toronto, headquartered here. I got there right out of school, had a job lined up before the end of my last semester, and I worked there for 2 years.
Interesting. So did you like your job, by the way? Was it the kind of job you wanted? Was it the kind of thing that you expected after you graduated?
It was something definitely what I expected. Being a software developer, I've also done internships during my undergrad. So I had industry experience coming out of school. So I had a fair bit of expectations of what kind of technologies are existent or prevalent in the industry and what is like the hot topic and what are people looking at the most. Mm-hmm. And being in the industry gave me the opportunity to, work on those skills, be it, working with a certain framework that you use for software development. I got to play with that. Also within the bank, during my 2 years, I ensured that I try to get, as much, in terms of different skills, because, you can get too comfortable too fast. And I wanted to, try different things. And I was in a program where they basically rotate you in different positions. And that gave me the opportunity to go from an internal facing application to a public facing application to an application that generates the most amount of revenue for the bank, and then back to an internal application. So it was a fair bit of
one thing about that constantly changing your positions. I hope your position was not changed to a janitor just for the sake of it or something.
No, even though there's a joke that I shared with Puya all the time when I was in school, and then I would just make up a company, and then he would ask me, so where are you going for work? And I would just make up a company. He's like, oh wow, that's really good. So what are you doing? And I would tell him, I got the job of a head janitor.
I'm telling you, man, that's part of the learning process, I guess. And before I go any further, by the way, I got a question right off the bat, because it's not about this topic necessarily, but it's about what you did for 2 years. You see, nowadays, because I work internationally and I use the application, the basically iOS apps of many different banks around the world. And my question to you is this, because you've worked in this field and you're also a software engineer. How safe are these banking apps? Because nowadays, from my perspective, almost 95% of all of my transactions are done online. So can we rely on these apps? Can we rely on online banking from your perspective?
I think because everything is turning to the online world, bank is essentially approaching, in the same direction. So anything from a transaction point of view to monitoring transactions to seeing how much you're spending. I think banks are doing a really good job, and then they are testing, and when they release an enhancement, or the bank that I worked for, when they released an enhancement or a feature, it was very well tested, and the customers would appreciate the new feature. For example, like when taking a picture of your check and depositing using your phone and not going to the branch. When that came in, that was very helpful for the customers, because now they did not have to go to a bank or an ATM machine to deposit the check. Like those pain points, I think with banks, it's pretty simple, because essentially what people do the most, and how can you turn that into digital experience. And that's essentially, if you can master that, which what most banks do, you can have a good turnaround of people. And then anytime you launch a new app, you would be sure that there would be a minimum amount of downloads, for example. I'll give you another example where the bank that I worked for, they launched a product where it would actually track your spending, and it would give you a notification anytime you spend outside, and it would give you a statistic on how, compared to the last year of that month, how much you're spending you're doing today.
I love these things, man. It's pretty cool. So based upon your experience, we can rely on online banking a lot more than the past.
Yeah, for sure.
Fantastic. Very well.
Yep.
That's pretty cool. So now let's go with the topic here. Before I go any further, let's now go to Poujix. So Poujix, this phenomenon is occurring a lot these days. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of criticism regarding the value of education, especially academic education and so on and so forth, when it comes to working. So what is your perspective on going back to school after you've left and worked in the industry for a while?
Right. Well, as you know, I sort of did that almost 3 years ago. After high school, I didn't actually go to university technically, and I spent my life self-studying, going to business, doing my own things, doing contract jobs or stuff like that. And after a certain point, I was like, you know what? I just actually want to go back to school. And the reason for that wasn't because I wanted a better job, better pay, or whatever. It might have happened because of a better degree or a degree or something, but that was not my purpose, and that is my point of view on the education. I don't care if you want to use it as an avenue to increase your revenue in a way or the other, but then my point of view on education is education shouldn't be chosen because it just increases your paycheck. And that just be it. It could be one of the reasons, but the main reason for me is that you do education because of education, for the sake of education. You don't do it for any other reason. And that's why I did it. Personally, I went back to school, and that was my personal reason on the matter.
Fantastic. So you both had this experience, basically. And let's start now again with Kenny about his story. So now you're back to school, or you are going to?
So yeah, I would be starting my master's in September, so in about 3 weeks from now.
Fantastic. And how does it feel like, by the way, to go back? I mean, literally, you've been away from this whole environment for 2 years now. So how does it feel like to be going back to school after 2 years of break?
I feel in the beginning it was that feeling of being scared, which I think is very normal, especially when you're doing something out of the ordinary, or, you're used to something and now you're okay, I want to change, or I want to go, in my case, for a master's degree. So there was that sense of unexpectedness, or, the uncertain, what's going to happen, right? But I think that the main thing, going back to Puja's point, is the idea of knowing what you want. And in this case, I had an inkling of what kind of masters I wanted to do, and I looked into it and I read about it. It was interesting, and at the same time, it was in the same school that I did my undergrad in, and I know the school fairly well. I live in the same city, and I know the access that through this program, what kind of access it would provide me, not just to my degree, but also to the researchers on school. And I feel especially when you make a decision like this, I think you should also think from a point of view, okay, you're not just going to school for, just your courses and your exams, but you're also going to the school for a broad range of network, a broad range of individuals you're going to meet from different walks of life. And then that's going to grow your network, both personal and professional. And you're going to meet a lot of interesting people. So that was the thing that, got me going. And that initial feeling of being scared was just, I think it's natural. Anytime you do something different, I think it's very natural for you to be nervous or scared. But then the goal of why you're doing, why you want to do it, I think that would give you that confidence and going ahead and being like, okay, no, this is what I want, and I'm excited about it.
Fantastic. Now back to Poujix. So you also took the leap, if you will, and you try to go back to school. First of all, why did you do it? And more importantly, how did it feel like? Because I'm not sure. I think you're still in school right now. You're going for bachelor's right now or master's?
Yep. Yeah.
That's
well,
right.
It's a bachelor's degree after a long time.
That's right. So how does it feel like, by the way, to be back in school and to study for your degree?
I really love it. Even when I got into school, I actually got into it doing the program that Canberra graduated in computer science. But then I pivoted, not that it's majorly different, but then I pivoted towards physics, and then eventually I wanted to do data science and data stuff in general, data analysis and all that.
Hold on a second. Are you saying you changed major 3 times?
Well, no, I still am doing physics, but then like in life, I want to do data.
Interesting. So right now your major is physics.
Yes.
Fantastic. Wow. You're the next Einstein, right? Pretty cool, man. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
The theory of irrelativity. I like it. Go for this one. It sounds pretty cool. All right.
Exactly. I'm going to create something like relatively relative.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. Fantastic.
Joke aside, I really, first of all, the reason I chose physics is actually there are many reasons. One of them being I don't do physics just for the sake of doing physics. I do it as a way of life. I think of it as a way of life, as a way of thinking. It's not just a program or a degree for me. It's actually, I appreciate it. I love it. So it speaks with me very well. And when you go further in life, you can do a lot of things with it. You can actually pivot a little towards engineering. You can do a lot of data stuff. You can you can do the system design, or you can do a lot of stuff. Having had a physics degree, maybe not specific to one area, so it might be harder to penetrate the barrier of actually getting to the industry. But there are so many industries that you can actually get into. That aside, I agree with the notion that Canberra said. Initially, it was terrifying because I spent 5 years after high school doing my own thing. I was relatively stable at the time-ish, you can say. But then I had to rattle the whole ship. It could actually sink down under me.
Wow.
And it was terrifying. So yeah, I mean it was. But then, as Cameron mentioned, the higher goal that you have, the reason that you do these stuff, it just pushes away the fear, and the fear becomes minimal.
Interesting.
To your eyes.
Great stories for both of you. So right now, let us talk about our listeners who might be thinking about going back to school and the pros and cons. They want to analyze, is it worth, because of course we're talking about student debt here, right? So, considering the cost in terms of time, in terms of money, as well as energy and so on and so forth, let's talk with you first, Kenny. What do you think about the pros and cons? When is it worth it to go back to school after you've left and you started a career?
I think it's worth. I think any time is worth it if you decide to go back to school, because if it's important to you, you would make that choice. At the end of the day, it's the choices that you make. Now, putting in the practicality in the picture, you have to think about, okay, if I'm going back to school, how am I funding my education? Am I using the money I saved up during my work, or am I getting student loan? Those are the questions that, they would come into the picture as you start thinking about going back to school. But there's so many options nowadays. You don't really have to go for full time. In my case, I had to go for full time, which meant I had to quit my work, and so I did that. But there are options where you can continue to work, and then you can do a part-time master's, which even if it takes longer, but you still have a degree, a master's degree. It really comes down to the flexibility that you have, or your employer might have. But at the end of the day, I think the main question lies with you. What do you want? want to do? Do you want to do it full time? Because the benefits of doing it full time is that you're completely immersed in that environment. And for me, I like to be immersed in a school environment, in the sense that I just don't want to focus on the courses, but there's so many other networks in school. There's library, there's the gym, like there's so many things.
There's the bar. I know. That's right, buddy.
There's the bar.
You got to have some fun as well, buddy. Why not?
We have a pub on the campus called Einstein Pub. So
amazing. Love it, man. Yeah. Is that the U of T? Is it your University of Toronto?
Yeah, it is.
Dude, yeah. I'm coming. Very nice. Fantastic.
So yeah, in terms of knowing those variables, I think money is obviously the biggest one, especially when you're in the work field and you're earning money. So it's a change of pace, because you won't be getting money, for example. But there's ways to still make money. For example, there's opportunities on campus to work, or you can still find a part-time job. Or if the work is flexible, you can do part-time work at the same workplace. At the end of the day, it really comes down to the flexibility that the degree provides and how much time you're willing to put. If you want to do another job, you have to then, put that in the equation, and then you have to think, okay, how much time can I focus on school? How much time can I focus on work? But at the end of the day, it's really, I feel for anyone deciding to go back to school, that factor of just being back in that environment is big anyway. So it's not a matter of do you want to find a job or not, but I think for anyone making that decision, just being back in that environment would be the most critical factor.
Fantastic. Great point. So, Poujix, from your perspective, from those of our listeners who might actually be concerned to go back to school, what are the right conditions? When should they consider going back to school, and how should they somehow assess the pros and cons of doing so?
First, I want to say something. Yeah, you should always go back to school, and I don't mean like necessarily university, meaning educating yourself. So that's
be a lifetime student.
Exactly. So that aside, like actually going back to school, to university and stuff like that, like a degree or something, as Cameron mentioned, there's so many variables. First of all, there's so many things you can do if you want to go back to school. So many degrees, so many ways to do it, part-time, full-time, et cetera, and then working at the same time, not working at the same time, where are you funding? And so there's so many questions, there's so many avenues here that you can take, and you got to start answering those questions. And as you do, some of these avenues will be eliminated because what doesn't go with your answer to the questions, and so then you will know the path better. So one of the reasons that you would go and go back to school is you want to change careers, you want to change pace, you want to go to a different field, or you want to actually build on what you have, which is what Canva is basically doing.
That's right. And
go further, go above and beyond. But as Canva mentioned, like there's some difficulty sometimes comes your way, and that is, for example, to answer to a few of my questions was, okay, I want to continue studying, but I, at the same time, have to provide for myself. So I had to work and study. I had to balance between the two a little bit. So the result it had, and it does have still, is that my graduation may be pushed back. I may take a little bit longer to graduate, but at the same time, I'm providing for myself. I don't have a full time, but I have multiple initiatives, multiple streams of incomes, minimal, but there are many of them. It suffices my life. So it's good. I eventually decided I don't care about graduating very quickly. So I answered these questions and I decided which avenue I want to take.
Fantastic.
So it's not like that's actually one avenue. It's either yes or no.
Bravo. Loved it all. So now that you've talked about this whole going back to school phenomenon and how it's okay to do so, let us talk about how we can later manage all of this basically and make it a part of our life. Earlier you mentioned that I had to somehow study part-time because I ran out of cash and stuff. So now you have multiple sources of income and simultaneously you're studying basically. And of course, I should tell all of our listeners that all of those sources of income are legal. So please don't be a hater. But the fact of the matter is that it's important to know all these details. But right now, earlier, Kenny mentioned student debt. And I'm personally not for debt unless it leads to making some capital. So let us talk about the costs and managing the cost as well. So what are the chances that somebody who's been out of the school and has been busy and working can actually get a full scholarship to go back to school? Is that a possibility from your perspective? I don't have the experience myself. So Kenny, do you think it's possible for somebody who's been out of school for many years, working in the field, to actually get a scholarship to be able to fund his or her studies?
For sure. There's so many opportunities. People, if you, most of the times, at least through my own experience, I've run into people who were complaining about the scholarships, but they didn't even know that there were some in place that they could have applied for. At the end of the day, like for example, in U of T, University of Toronto, they have a bazillion scholarships that you can apply for, and this goes not just for your undergrad. It's like they have for each specific program, and the idea there is that the university understands that not everyone is coming from the same walks of life. People have different financial situations, and they have things in place to help you out. If you can't apply for scholarships, there's bursaries in place. If you can't apply for those, then there's student loans in place. If that doesn't help you out, then there's personal lines of credit in place.
Wow.
At the end of the day, the fact of the matter is that you would get your study done no matter what.
Interesting.
There's ways to get it done.
Very good. Very good.
It's just a matter of how much money you want in scholarship. In the worst of the worst, you would have all the money in the form of a loan, and then you'd have to figure out how you can pay it back. But even the government loans that you get from the government, they do understand the fact that right after graduation, you don't have a job right away. So they do have a period of free interest, and they can extend that period as well. So it's not like you have to give me the money back. They let you take your time if you don't have a job, but if you do, then you can start paying it back. I think that question about money and how much you want to have a debt or how much you want in form of scholarship, if anyone who's anyone listening to the podcast, there's definitely going to be an idea or a scholarship. And this is not just for school. You can apply for scholarships external, outside of school.
Wow.
There's so many other initiatives that are happening, and this would apply, I'm pretty sure, to a lot of countries. But in the sense that if your school is not offering, then you can go outside, and then you can find something there, and then you can still get it funded.
Fantastic. So, Poujix, what do you think about this funding of going back to school, and what are the best ways to actually secure scholarships or make it easier or more cost efficient?
Right, and so the first thing I want to get back to the point Cameron made is that there are so many avenues that people are actually unaware of, and they're like complaining too, but then they're not aware of the existence of those avenues. So yeah, the first step is actually do your research. There's so many things that can actually fund your studies potentially, and look, at the end of the day, it comes down to your priorities too, right? Like if money is the only priority, don't go back to school. Like that doesn't make any sense, but it might, but then like not necessarily. But in a sense that again, like I personally, one of the reasons that I am taking longer is to be able to work at the same time, to be able to earn. So like a lot of
Although Poujix, you aren't always just studying and working. You're busy with some other stuff as well on the side, right?
Well, it happens, yeah.
That takes time, buddy. Takes a lot of the nights out of the schedule. I know.
So I'm gonna name three things that I do basically: study, work, and live. So
awesome. You call it living. I don't call it living, buddy. I call it living beautifully and full of pleasure. I love it.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
Well, yeah, so exactly. That's the point. Like I talk to a lot of like younger minds. Obviously, I'm more mature than most of my peers by virtue of going back to school very late. But when I talk to those people, I see the tendency that they want to get out of the school as soon as possible and get into the workplace. And well, their reasoning makes a little bit of sense because everybody thinks like that. I want to get out and make more money, but then I want to make money while I'm in school and get the experience, get the exposure, learn a lot of stuff outside of the classroom, which is, I think, very important.
That's
and
right.
I'm appreciating. So I don't care if it takes much longer to graduate. It's not an issue for me as long as I can afford it, and as long as, which actually makes me more able to afford it when I take longer because I'm making money on the side.
Fantastic.
And
it's like the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and I'm learning a lot. I'm getting to meet a lot of people. I'm getting to use the values of being a student because it always, like, a lot of things are a little bit cheaper being a student.
Exactly. That's right. Very good.
There are so many perks. So yeah, I mean, eventually there are ways to do whatever you want. You just gotta have to figure it out. I remember, if I'm not mistaken, I don't remember who this was, but I remember this quote. I don't know who's associated to. It says, either I will find a way or I will make a way.
Wow. Love it, man. Love it, man. Fantastic. Great quote. Great quote. And since we don't know the author, we can just see it right now. It's our quote. That's right. Pretty cool. I love it. But with that being said, in this podcast, we want to somehow appeal to both sides of the aisle, and we like to be more unbiased, basically. So let's talk somehow against this as well. Could there be any arguments against going back to school, and what types of people you might not recommend to do so? So let's go first to Kenny here. Are there any arguments against going back to school, and what types of people from your perspective are better off just not going back to school?
Look, I think if you're in a field where you are performing exceptionally, you're getting promotions, like you're on top of the game, and you are positioning yourself, to maybe, diversify, go in different avenues. The point there being that you know what you're doing and you're really into, you're fully invested in that lifestyle, then it obviously would not make sense for you to go out and go back to school because you're not even thinking about it.
That's right.
Or even for people who would be invested in those kind of avenues and resourceful, they would find ways to find courses online, because there's a lot of paid courses now. Courses offered, for example, from Google. You can keep up to the game by just listening to the courses offered by the industry experts, which would probably go well if you're in the industry, and then people would know, okay, you're keeping up with the material, or you're keeping up with what's going on, and then you're ready to learn more. I think with the idea of going back to school, it's very specific. It's the matter there is also, you're changing your environment. It's not just virtual. Some universities might still be virtual, so you can do it part-time, but there's most of the paid courses online, I think, are really, really good. It basically gives you more than what you need. And nowadays, there's so many courses, especially with intro to web development and all that, where people are just enrolling in these courses and they don't even go to the university, and then they just get out of the program, and it's a 5 or 10 week intensive program, and then right after that they have a job lined up without even going to university. So there are ways to, what you want would obviously depend on your priorities. But again, if you're completely vested in your work life, I can give stereotypical examples where somebody who's in the finance, or in accounting or in management, those kind of roles are so diversifying each and every day that they need people who can, be a project manager and also be a scrum master, people who can, learn different skills on the job,
Exactly.
Make yourself, not just limit yourself in one, not just in management, but also, bits and pieces of product management. If you want to be a product manager, a lot of those people have management background. They don't have software background.
That's right.
And in terms of people who are for software, it's like I said, there's so many courses and online. There's self-study courses. You find tons of information from the industry experts for free online in the form of blogs, in the form of websites. So you don't really have to go back to school. It's for those kind of avenues, unless you want to be in that kind of environment. And I feel like it's for some people going back to school might be, to get an MBA, accelerate your degree. And, with an MBA, you can, pivot into a manager career, for example.
That's right.
Versus for somebody who want to, do research, they've done that in their own time, but they want to, they know some people in the school who are good, well-known researchers, and they want to work with them. And that's the reason they want to be in school, and they want to be in that kind of environment. So it really comes down to different, but in terms of not going back to school, obviously if you're earning a lot of money, and you see, okay, I'm earning a lot of money, it's providing for everything that I do right now. I own a house, I have a car, everything is being provided by the money that I'm making. If I go back to school, then, the money would be an issue. Then, in that case, it would not be viable for you to go back to school unless that's the thing you want, in which case you would then start figuring out, okay, what do I need to do? You have to figure out your expenses. If you're not going to make that much money, then you have to cut down on your expenses, which could mean, you might have to give away your car. So, there's, for somebody who has the priorities figured out, if they want to go back to school and they know, okay, the source of income is going to decline, it doesn't mean that you have to keep up your expenses at the same level. You have to drop them down as well.
Very good point.
Unless you're unless you're making the same amount of money during school, and then you have to figure out, okay, I'm also going to the classes, I'm also doing assignments, but I'm also making the same amount of money. So there's, like, okay, like, what am I focusing on here?
So
like,
true.
Maybe I should go back.
Absolutely. Great point.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the fact that you should consider your costs as well. If you're making good money, then why do you have to go back to school? But again,
Exactly.
Earlier on, Poujix mentioned it's not always about money. There are other factors involved as well that you have to consider. So going back to Poujix here right now. So buddy, yourself, what are your arguments against going back to school, and what types of individuals should not go back to school?
Look, for me personally, when I'm going to make a decision of something to do or something not to do, how I look at it is, why do I do this, or why do I not do this? So I need a reason basically for that. And because everybody else is doing it is not a good reason. Because everybody else is going to school is not a good reason. That's why I honestly didn't go to school initially when I was 18.
That's right.
Although at the time I was like very young and inexperienced too, but that was part of my experience through life.
That's right.
So yeah, like if you don't have a good reason, and again, like a couple of decades ago, without a degree, it would be extremely difficult to get a job, and it wasn't as dynamic. The business market to open your own business.
So true.
So it might have been more difficult and you had to actually do it. But nowadays, again, to get a job is not a good reason to go to school, in my opinion, and neither is because everybody else is doing it. So if you're going back to school, you better have a goddamn good reason.
Absolutely.
So yeah, if you don't have it, then don't do it because everybody else is doing it. That's just stupid, in my opinion. And as Kenwer mentioned, like if money is important to you, if you're making loads of money, then it's irrelevant to go back to school. But personally, I go back to school. I do educate myself. I do by the way, like as Kenwer mentioned, like if you need a toolbox, if you need some sort of skill set, you can learn that being specific to a couple of courses, not going through 4 years or 5 years of undergrad.
That's right. Exactly.
Don't actually. So yeah, there are a lot of reasons actually not to go to school. But then I would encourage everybody with curiosity and eagerness to learn to go actually back to school, because if you have that fire, it's good to put wood in it and make it bigger and bigger and bigger, because it brings you success eventually.
Fantastic.
Right.
Loved it. It was a great discussion. Go ahead.
I just want to add on to Poujix's point here. In terms of going back to school, you're not just going back to school per se for the degree, but you're also going to that environment. You're also going to, you're meeting people. It's not just about being in school, like otherwise everyone would be homeschooled, but that social aspect of it is coming in the picture too. And you never know, like you might find your next business partner there. You might find your next life partner there. Like it's like life is full of.
You might find friends that you can bring on your podcast.
Right. Yes, and you also might find unwanted pregnancy there as well. There's a lot of things you can actually find in there. But overall, joke aside, it's so true, because we ignore the fact that a university is like a small society. There's a huge social element to academic studies as well as university attendance. So I fully agree with Kenny here in that it's not just about the degree or the information or the knowledge that you acquire by attending courses, but actually by being there and being around these wonderful people, these bright minds who can actually truly inspire you. So true. I agree completely in this regard. And it's a wonderful discussion. So we're running out of time here. Let's try to actually wrap up today's conversation one by one. So first, Kenny, you're obviously going back in a couple of weeks. What is now your final comment regarding the concept of going back to school after having been out for a while?
I would say know your why. Why, if in my case, why do I want to go back to school? That is very important, because in the face of uncertainty, in the face of being scared, that why is going to keep you going.
Fantastic.
If you have people questioning you, okay, why are you doing this? If that why is not, if that's not certain, then who's going to believe you? And if you know what you're doing, then, people will trust you because they know what you're doing. So,
absolutely.
The fact of the matter is, know what you want to do and why. Why is the key here, and it makes sense for you to put the practicality in the picture, because you've been in work, so you've been making money, to also see, okay, if I go back to school, like how does that changes things for me? Like how does that change my financial situation, my social situation? Like those questions are very logical, because you've been in the industry, you've had that experience. You're not just fresh out of school. And I think it's just, going back to school after, work experience is, like, I feel like you have a different lens going back to school.
Wow.
And you see things differently, you interact differently. Like, it's, I feel like, because you have that experience, right? You have that work experience. We've had co-workers, you've worked with managers, all that. So I think, when you go back to school in that situation, it'll be really interesting. The why would get you through it, and you never know. Like, it's once you're there, it's just gonna be a whole different. Like, things will be interesting. Like, going back to school. I think a lot of people who do decide, or who listening to this podcast, who want to decide to go back to school, being scared is natural, but like, there's so many good things waiting for you.
Exactly. Great one. And Poujix, what is your final thought about this concept?
I never encourage people to go back to school, but I encourage people to get to the mindset to go back to school. And with the right mindset, I believe going back to school is good for everybody, educating yourself very academically. As Kanwar mentioned, that was the point that was missing from our conversation until he mentioned the social aspect of it is huge. And he's one of those people that I personally know that very much utilize on the social aspect in his undergrad. And I'm pretty sure he's going to do that in the next 2 years of his master's and probably further. So yeah, that's also another aspect that for a young person, it's very good because you don't have a lot of communities beyond your family, so you can create those on your own. And for other people too, you get to create new communities of new people, different people perhaps, and get to know a lot of people. So that's one aspect of it that is always missing from conversations, perhaps, that I'm really thankful that he brought up. But eventually, I think with the right mindset, everybody is fit to go back to school. So you just have to have the mindset. And if you don't, then it doesn't make any sense. No, just forget about it.
Fantastic. Bravo. What a great discussion that I heard from both of you guys. And I really hope that if you want to enhance your future prospect in your career as well as in your life, then of course you always have the option of going back to school and using the tips and the tricks that was offered by Kenny and Poujix here. You probably now are a lot more able to do and to make good decisions in this regard. That's all the time we have for. And before we go any further, just want to tell all of our listeners, if you are listening to us right now on Podbean with the link that we provided in social media, please do us a favor right now and go to either Google Play and iTunes and try to subscribe to the show, because once you're subscribed, you can get all of our notifications as soon as any show is ready. So if you're right now on Podbean, it's going to take you literally 30 seconds to simply go to podcast app on the iTunes, basically, or you can simply use Google Play to subscribe to the show and enjoy the content as soon as every show is made available for our listeners. That's all the time we have for. Guys, I want to thank you so much. Poujix, really, thanks a lot for arranging the whole things. And I really appreciate all your work. And Kenny, well, first of all, I'd like to congratulate you for going back to school. I wish you the best in terms of your studies and the social environment, all that stuff. But just be careful, buddy. Things could get a little bit problematic sometimes. So I want to wish you the best in that regard. And of course, that's all the time we have for. My name is Daniel Mulligan, and thank you so much for listening to our show. Have a good one.